Have you ever felt like you were doing everything right, but nobody was watching? Have you served faithfully, shown up consistently, and still watched others get the spotlight while you remained in the shadows? If you've felt invisible, overlooked, or undervalued despite your best efforts, what I'm about to share with you will change how you see your own journey. This is the untold story of Reggie Smith, a man who waited over a decade for his moment, never complained, and ultimately became one of the most respected voices in contemporary gospel music. But here's what makes his story so powerful. It's not about his incredible talent, though he has that. It's about what his quiet rise teaches us about faith, timing, and the kind of legacy that actually lasts. By the end of this, you're going to understand why some people's greatest achievements come not from fighting for attention, but from perfecting their craft in obscurity. And you'll discover the exact mindset shift that transforms waiting from painful to purposeful. Let's start with something that might surprise you. Reggie Smith didn't grow up dreaming of being on stage. He grew up in Jonesboro, Arkansas, in a modest family where church, school, and music were the foundation of everything. His community had a strong gospel tradition, but Reggie wasn't pushed toward music as a career or as something to leverage for fame. Instead, music became a calling for him, something spiritual, something that felt like his true purpose. This is the first crucial insight. When you're driven by calling rather than ambition, you develop a completely different relationship with your work. You stop measuring success by applause and start measuring it by integrity. Reggie understood this instinctively, even as a young person. His family supported his gift, recognizing that his voice had something special, something warm and grounded, that didn't demand attention but commanded respect. He studied vocal performance and music at Arkansas State University, then made the strategic move that would define his trajectory. He relocated to Nashville, the epicenter of both country and gospel music. Now, here's where most people's stories would feature a rapid rise. They'd study in the right city, network aggressively, and push themselves into the spotlight. But Reggie's story takes a different turn, and this is where it gets really valuable. He and his wife, Lady Love Smith, started performing together in the early 2000s, and they began building something most artists never appreciate, a reputation for excellence in the background. They became background session singers for some of the biggest names in gospel music, recording with Sandy Patty, Larnell Harris, and eventually Bill and Gloria Gaither themselves. They were in the studio. They were on the road. They were heard by hundreds of thousands of people, but nobody knew their names. Most people would see this as a setback, as proof that they hadn't made it. But Reggie saw it as refinement. Every session was an opportunity to learn. Every tour was a chance to understand not just how to sing, but how to serve a larger vision. This is the counterintuitive truth that most ambitious people miss. Spending years as a supporting voice doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're being prepared for something bigger. The real test of Reggie's character came around 2005, when the Gaither Vocal Band began regularly featuring him and Lady on their recordings and tours. For 10 years, an entire decade, Reggie and his wife provided backing harmonies for Gaither homecoming albums, DVDs, and live performances. 10 years. Think about that length of time. In our culture of instant gratification, where people expect results within months or even weeks, Reggie showed up consistently for 10 years, without an official title, without top billing, without the recognition that most people believe they deserve after such dedication. During this entire period, the Gaither Vocal Band cycled through numerous lead vocalists. Guy Penrod left, then Mark Lowry had his own journey, David Phelps brought his powerful tenor, and Michael English came and went. Each of these men was featured, celebrated, and prominently positioned. Meanwhile, Reggie remained steady in the background. And here's the psychological insight that nobody talks about. This kind of waiting tests not your talent, but your character. Anyone can perform when they're celebrated, But can you perform with excellence, with joy, with spiritual authenticity when nobody's watching? Can you truly be happy for someone else's success when you're still waiting for your own? Reggie answered yes to both those questions every single day for a decade. There's something important happening in that waiting period that we need to examine closely, because it explains why Reggie ultimately succeeded where so many others fail. When you're not chasing attention, you actually improve at exponential rates. You become a student instead of a performer. You study vocal technique, harmonic relationships, and musical dynamics from the inside of the greatest gospel group in the world. You watch how Bill Gaither constructs arrangements, how he manages personalities, how he balances commercial appeal with spiritual authenticity. You see what works in a live setting versus a studio setting. You understand the difference between a technically perfect performance and one that actually moves people emotionally. Most importantly, you develop relationships based on genuine respect and service, rather than competition. The crew members, the other singers, the musicians, they all begin to see you as someone they can trust, someone who lifts others up rather than needing to be lifted up yourself. This is the foundation of real influence, though most people never realize it while they're building it. By 2017, something significant shifted. The Gaither Vocal Band had been evolving, and David Phelps, who had brought an extraordinary high tenor that defined a particular era of the group, decided to pursue other opportunities. This was a crucial departure, because Phelps wasn't just a vocalist, he was a distinctive voice that fans associated with the group's modern sound. His solos were jaw-dropping. His range was unusual. He brought a certain star energy that casual listeners noticed immediately. The Gaither organization faced a real question. Who could replace him? And here's where the politics of the music industry became evident. Band dynamics are complicated. When you have multiple vocalists with established fan bases, egos, and creative differences, managing the group becomes as much about psychology as music. Reggie was finally officially invited to join as a full member, but not as a replacement for Phelps. Instead, Reggie brought something completely different. He didn't try to match Phelps's range or replicate his star power. He did something far more valuable. He brought his own authentic voice, which was warm, soulful, and smooth. He brought a baritone that anchored arrangements in a way the group needed. But most importantly, he accepted that his role was different from what came before, and he excelled in that role rather than resenting it. The transition wasn't smooth, and this is where the real story gets vulnerable and honest. Some longtime fans weren't ready to accept Reggie. On fan forums and social media, he saw comments about being too plain, lacking the star energy people were accustomed to, not having the celebrity shine. These comments weren't just surface-level criticism, they were rejections of his very presence in a position he'd worked toward for more than a decade. Imagine finally getting the recognition you've been working for, only to have people tell you that you're not good enough for it. Most people would either quit or become bitter. Reggie did something different. He remained gracious. He stayed professional. In interviews, he never snapped back or defended himself aggressively. But make no mistake, those critiques hurt. This is the reality of pursuing something meaningful. Success doesn't come without pain. The difference between people who ultimately succeed and those who give up isn't that successful people don't experience rejection. It's that they feel the rejection, acknowledge it, and continue moving forward anyway. They don't weaponize their pain, they transform it. Beyond the fan resistance, Reggie navigated other pressures that rarely get discussed in success stories. As a creative artist, he had his own musical ideas and perspectives on how arrangements should work, but he was joining a band led by Bill Gaither, a legendary figure who had very specific visions for the group's sound and branding. Bill was receptive to input, but ultimately controlling, which is necessary when you're stewarding a legacy. Reggie had to learn how to honor his own artistic instincts while submitting to a larger vision. This is an underrated skill that determines whether talented people thrive in group settings or constantly clash. You have to be confident enough to know your worth, but flexible enough to understand that sometimes the larger mission matters more than your individual preferences. Additionally, full-time touring is brutal. While other band members had established families or support systems, Reggie and Lady were managing marriage, ministry, and mental health while traveling most of the year. There were seasons of fatigue, homesickness, and relational strain. Lady has openly discussed in interviews how their marriage felt, the weight of constant travel and separation from their community. This isn't romantic. This isn't what you see on stage with perfect smiles and beautiful harmonies. This is real life, and Reggie had to navigate it while maintaining excellence in his public role. What's remarkable about Reggie's response to these obstacles is what it reveals about character under pressure. When Mark Lowry left the group amid creative tensions and public disagreements, Reggie faced his own internal conflicts but handled them privately. While other band members occasionally had public dust-ups or creative controversies that made headlines, Reggie kept his struggles internal. He worked through disagreements about arrangements or stage management respectfully, behind closed doors. He never used social media to call out frustrations. He never participated in the kind of performative conflict that others in the industry seem to court. Instead, he invested his energy into being a stabilizer. Backstage, he was praying with crew members. He was mentoring up-and-coming performers like Wes Hampton and Todd Suttles. He was creating space for others to succeed. This is the definition of servant leadership, though Reggie would probably hate being labeled with that term. It's not something he performed. It's something he lived. People who worked with him directly describe him as kind, genuinely knowledgeable about music and theology, and firmly grounded in his beliefs. Outside of performances, he and Lady coach young Christian couples, speak at churches, and have become advocates for mental health awareness and adoption. They've experienced personal tragedy, including miscarriage, and have openly discussed how God's faithfulness showed up in their darkest moments. This personal foundation completely changes how Reggie approaches performing. When he sings songs like "Through It All" or "I Know Who Holds Tomorrow," he's not just executing vocal technique, he's testifying. He's sharing what he actually knows from lived experience. He's singing about promises he's tested and foundational truths he's depended on. This authenticity cannot be manufactured, and it cannot be rushed. It only comes through years of genuine spiritual development, disappointment, and faith. And audiences feel the difference. It's the same reason some performers captivate rooms and others, despite technical perfection, feel hollow. Real presence comes from real depth, and real depth takes time to develop. This is something that can't be shortcut or faked, which is why waiting periods, struggles, and obstacles aren't deviations from success. They're prerequisites for meaningful success. Today, Reggie Smith occupies a completely different position than he did in 2015. He's no longer the new member trying to prove himself or the question mark that sparked fan debate. He's a vital, respected member of the current Gaither Vocal Band roster. But his role has evolved beyond just being a vocalist. He's become a voice of reason within the group. He's a peacemaker when creative tensions arise. He's a stabilizer when the logistics of touring get overwhelming. In a group whose history has included considerable personnel changes, creative conflicts, and behind-the-scenes drama, Reggie represents something different: consistency, compassion, and spiritual rootedness. What Bill Gaither recognized 10 years before the general public is now evident to anyone paying attention. Reggie brings something irreplaceable to the ensemble. It's not always visible in a single highlight reel or a 30-second promotional clip, but it becomes undeniable when you experience the group across a full album or a complete tour. Here's the profound lesson that Reggie's story illustrates, and it's relevant whether you're in music, business, relationships, or any meaningful field. Your greatest position of influence rarely comes from fighting for it. It comes from being faithful where you're planted and allowing your character to speak louder than your ambition. Reggie didn't campaign for a spot in the Gaither Vocal Band. He didn't network aggressively or use social media to build a personal brand that would pressure the organization into featuring him. He simply showed up. He sang with excellence. He supported others. He grew spiritually. He developed as an artist and as a person. And when the moment came, when the organization needed someone with his specific qualities, he was ready not just musically but spiritually and emotionally. This is what divine timing actually looks like in practice. It doesn't feel like a dramatic moment when it happens. It feels like a natural unfolding of who you've been becoming. The deeper truth that Reggie's journey reveals is this. In a culture obsessed with visibility, recognition, and personal branding, genuine greatness often looks unremarkable. It doesn't have scandal, it doesn't have viral moments or controversy, it doesn't demand attention. Instead, it quietly builds, one faithful choice at a time, until eventually it becomes undeniable. Reggie never had a public breakdown or a dramatic comeback narrative. He never had to cancel tour dates or take time off to find himself. His story doesn't have the kind of dramatic arc that makes for explosive social media content, but it has something infinitely more valuable. It has integrity. It has proven character. It has a man whose private life and public life reflect the same values, which is increasingly rare in an era where people skillfully manage multiple identities across different platforms. If you're someone who feels like you're working hard, but nobody's watching, if you're showing up consistently, but not getting recognized, if you're starting to wonder whether faithfulness actually matters, in a world that seems to reward aggression and self-promotion, Reggie Smith's story is a specific answer to your doubt. Your faithfulness matters. The work you're doing in the unseen spaces counts. The character you're developing while nobody's applauding will become your greatest asset when your actual season of visibility arrives. And most importantly, your waiting period isn't wasted time, it's essential preparation. The version of you that emerges from that season will be exponentially more equipped to handle what comes next than if you'd fought your way into prominence prematurely. Reggie Smith understood this, not through intellectual knowledge but through lived experience. He trusted it even when trust felt difficult. And that trust has resulted in a legacy that will outlast trends, outlast criticism, and outlast the temporary fame that comes and goes so quickly in entertainment. His legacy is the kind that shapes culture quietly, influences people spiritually, and stands as a testimony that faithfulness, humility, and genuine character still matter in a world increasingly convinced they don't. So the question isn't whether Reggie Smith succeeded. Clearly, he did. The real question is whether you're willing to succeed on these terms, not through noise and self-promotion, but through consistent excellence, genuine character, and faithful service where you're planted right now. Because that's not just the story of one gospel singer. That's the blueprint for meaningful success in whatever field you're pursuing. Think about the people you actually respect most in your own life. Chances are, they're not the loudest in the room. They're not the ones constantly talking about themselves or seeking validation. They're the ones who've shown up consistently, who've helped you without expecting credit, who've grown through their own struggles and can speak from genuine experience. That's the kind of person Reggie became, and that's the kind of person you can become if you're willing to play the long game. The music industry, like every competitive field, is littered with talented people who burned out because they were running from something or running toward applause instead of running toward their calling. Reggie ran toward his calling, and that made all the difference. Every time he chose integrity over visibility, every time he chose service over self-promotion, every time he chose to work on his character in private instead of performing for public approval, he was making a deposit into an account that would eventually pay out in ways he couldn't have predicted.